It's your boy Brainwavezz. Brittney Griner has been released from Russia. She is no longer in prison, and at the time of this video, she is currently on a plane headed back to the United States. This has been a prisoner swap deal, so arms dealer Victor Bout has been released from U.S. custody and is currently on the way back to Russia. This is a long time coming. This is a miracle to many of you. This is considered a blessing to many of you. Nonetheless, this also reflects the current state of affairs with Putin and where Russia is with the war in Ukraine. So nonetheless, I'm going to show you some footage from ABC News as well as USA Today showing President Joe Biden speak about Brittney Griner's release. You will also see Brittney Griner's wife, and you will also see some details about what happened and how this happened, etc., etc. So let me get this information to you all, but this is a long time coming, and we are so happy that she is back here in the States with us.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good morning. We have breaking news. ABC News has learned that Brittney Griner, the WNBA star, has been released from a Russian prison. Of course, this is something that the Biden administration has been working on for some time. So I want to go straight to our senior White House correspondent, Chief White House Correspondent Cecilia Vega. Cecilia.
Well, George, we expect to hear from President Biden in just a few minutes, actually. We just heard from the White House at 8:30. And look, this is a major win for this White House. This is a major win for the country to get Brittney Griner home, the WNBA star who has been in prison in Russia. She has been held there in captive for over 9 months now. Just recently, President Biden had said that there had been regular talks between the U.S. and Moscow. He's been talking to her wife as well, and there have been constant communication. But this is a negotiation that has happened at the highest levels of both governments at a time when tensions are at their most high between these two countries. Of course, she has been held in captivity, held in custody there after she was found guilty of illegal drug possession. You'll remember that she was sentenced to 9 years in prison. She was recently moved to one of those penal colonies. And again, this has been negotiations that have been going at the highest levels, but have been happening behind closed doors. It is unclear at this point, I believe, what who the White House is going to swap for. We actually just have that in. This is Victor Bout, the Russian, if I remember correctly, the convicted Russian arms dealer. Moscow had wanted to potentially have an exchange for Vadim Krasikov, the assassin who shot the former Chechen rebel. That did not happen. But, George, this is a huge deal. It is breaking right now, and we expect to hear more from President Biden later this morning around 8:30. He'll be speaking here at the White House. A big scramble to get everyone here this morning. This was not on the agenda. It happened very early. And again, we expect to hear from him shortly.
Okay, Cecilia, thanks very much. Pierre Thomas, let me bring you in. What more can you tell us about Victor Bout?
Well, Victor Bout is a convicted arms smuggler of the highest order that the United States government had convicted. He was serving a 25-year sentence. I spoke with a source just a few moments ago who said the swap had in fact taken place. Brittney Griner for Victor Bout. Obviously, law enforcement, not the lead on this particular case. This was dealt with at the highest diplomatic levels. As Cecilia just said, the president himself signing off on the swap. The White House was under enormous pressure to get this done. The likes of LeBron James, the Stephen Curry, major stars in the NBA telling the White House over and over, get this done. This woman does not need to be in custody. So, therefore, the United States government reacting to this have been working behind the scenes. My source saying the swap has taken place. Law enforcement was involved in transporting Victor Bout to the location. Swap has taken place, George.
Okay, thank you. Let me bring you Martha Raddatz, our Chief Global Affairs anchor. And Martha, we know there are other Americans in custody in Russia, including Paul Whelan.
Paul Whelan, and this is going to be a huge issue. The Whelan family, of course, has put pressure on the administration as well. He was arrested in 2018. He has been held there ever since. He was accused of spying. The Russians claim they found a USB drive on his person that included the names of intelligence officers. He has really been in the news with Brittney Griner. She, of course, has the celebrity. There are so many people who came forward and pleaded pleaded for her release. She had the unfortunate timing. She was arrested about a week before the Russians invaded Ukraine and has been held ever since. She, of course, in June said, I did have hashish oil with me, thinking she'd get a lesser sentence. That did not happen. This is, of course, great news, but the Whelan family is going to be hugely disappointed, George.
Thank you, Martha. I want to bring in our military analyst, Steve Gaynor. Steve, we know this is a straight-up swap so far. This is the details we have for Victor Bout, the arms dealer. I guess one of the big questions will be is, does this have any connection to the war in Ukraine?
George, it has every connection. I think there's another question here, and that is why now? Brittney Griner's been in jail for a while now. Her public star is declining just a bit, and that means she's less utility as a negotiating pawn to Putin. So he saw his opportunity here. Remember, it all comes back to the relationship between Russia and the U.S. and what's going on in Ukraine. And so Putin probably said, now's the time to do it. This is our maximum negotiating leverage, and this will get us the best PR and hopefully improve the relationship with the U.S. So now is the time. And you notice that Victor Bout is in there. His heyday was in the 90s, and he's really not that big a player here. So they had to do a 1-for-1. I'm not surprised that Whelan wasn't included. They weren't going to give us a 2-for-1 deal.
Thank you, Steve. Cecilia, you said this is a big deal for the Griner family. We're also learning that Brittney Griner's wife, Sherelle, is at the White House, and both she and the president have spoken with Brittney.
Yes, exactly. And I'm thinking back to this summer. We have heard, frankly, very little publicly from Brittney Griner as she has been in captivity. Of course, we all have seen those horrifically sad images of her during those trials held behind glass, or basically held in captivity there, and just heartbreaking images. But back in July, the president did receive a letter from Griner on the 4th of July in which she said that she was terrified that she could end up there in Moscow forever. There has been a lot of communication between President Biden and Griner's wife, Sherelle, as you just said. She was here at the White House late in the summer. But, George, it was just not too long ago after the midterms that President Biden signaled that now that the midterms had ended, that perhaps Vladimir Putin would be willing to talk more seriously about a prisoner exchange. The president knew that Vladimir Putin was very closely watching the political situation here in our own country, and was hoping that, in fact, now that the politics of those midterms were over, that would signal some kind of sit-down. Usually the U.S. negotiates behind closed doors on these high-level talks like this. And in this case, there was an unusual move over the summer where the administration came out publicly to say that they had put this very substantial offer for this exchange on the table, hoping to secure Griner's release and, of course, Whelan's release back in July. But the U.S. offered this proposed exchange. Again, as I was saying, for Bout, Moscow did not really take that seriously. The U.S. implied that they didn't feel like they were getting very far in those negotiations. But even the fact that they publicly had talked about that detail of the negotiation was pretty unusual, and just shows, again, we can't emphasize enough what high stakes, the high levels that these talks have been happening at.
Thank you, Cecilia. I want to go back to Martha Raddatz. Martha, let's pick up on what I was talking about with Steve Gaynor. Interesting time now in the war in Ukraine. It's been grinding on now for months and months. We had President Macron of France here last week meeting with President Biden. Of course, Macron has been pushing for negotiations. You wonder what else is going on behind the scenes.
Well, I was thinking today about what Vladimir Putin said yesterday about nuclear war, that nuclear war is more likely, and yet he tried very hard to downplay that the Russians would ever use a nuclear weapon. He basically talked about his own mental stability as well, saying, we are not mad. We know what nuclear weapons do, and we use them only as a deterrent. Vladimir Putin wants this war to end. He wants to get out of this war. He has talked about negotiations. The Ukrainians will have none of that. They think they have made progress. So Vladimir Putin, this seems like the exact right thing to do, as Steve said, right now, to release Brittney Griner, to try to get some better relationship with not only the U.S. but the world. But I don't think that's really going to work, George.
Probably not. Let me bring Steve Gaynor back. Steve, we saw the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, yesterday also say that basically the end game would have to include Vladimir Putin pulling back all the way, maybe getting Crimea, nothing else, nothing that he's gained since the war. Possible that Vladimir Putin, given the situation he's in now, could ever accept that?
I don't think so, George. It would be political suicide. The Crimea holds a special place in the hearts of Russians and in Putin's heart as well. So I don't think he could give that up and politically survive. I think if they go back to the pre-February 15th line before the Russian invasion, that's probably going to be the negotiating benchmark. But at this point, I think that there's a lot of long winter grinding and negotiation that's going to have to go on before we can begin to think about peace talks.
Okay, Steve. Pierre, what more are we learning about Victor Bout?
Arms dealer of the highest order, someone who had a fleet of aircraft, a merchant of death, as he's been described in the past. And it's clear that the U.S. government felt enormous pressure to use that chip, because this is not the kind of person that the United States government would want to free from a lengthy prison term. But the fact that Brittney Griner was seen as an important figure, had become a symbol of unfair treatment in Russia, that the administration felt the need to make this singularly important move at this particular point, George. Again, just to emphasize, this man was a person who was one of the bigger arms dealers in the world. He had been convicted, was serving his term, and now the United States government said, okay, we'll release him in order to get Brittney Griner back.
And so, John, Carl, let me bring you in as well. Pull back a little bit. We know there was quite a pressure campaign to get Brittney Griner out of Russian prison, all through Washington, all across the country.
You know, this was a top priority for President Biden in particular. Made a major effort. For months, it was a private effort through channels to try to pressure the Russians to release her, offering up, of course, Victor Bout. What was extraordinary about that campaign is that at one point, you know, Biden went, and the Biden administration went public with it, George, publicly making it clear they were willing to trade Victor Bout. To get Griner freed, something that was an indication that the negotiations really weren't going anywhere. But this has been something that Biden has personally been involved, the personal involvement of the president, and of course against the backdrop of the Russian invasion of Ukraine at a time when Russian U.S. relations were at a low, really a low since any time since the Cold War.
Okay, John, Carl, thanks very much. Again, Brittney Griner has been released from a Russian prison in custody with U.S. officials right now.
Well, good morning, folks, and it is a good morning. Moments ago, standing together with her wife, Sherelle, in the Oval Office, I spoke with Brittney Griner. She's safe. She's on a plane. She's on her way home. After months of being unjustly detained in Russia, held under intolerable circumstances, Brittney will soon be back in the arms of her loved ones, and she should have been there all along. This is a day we've worked toward for a long time. We never stopped pushing for her release. It took painstaking and intense negotiations, and I want to thank all the hard-working public servants across my administration who worked tirelessly to secure her release. I also want to thank the UAE for helping us facilitate Brittney's return, because that's where she landed. These past few months have been hell for Brittney and for Charlie and her entire family and all her teammates back home. People all across the country have learned about Brittney's story, advocated for her release, stood with her throughout this terrible ordeal. And I know that support meant a lot to her family. I'm glad to be able to say that Brittney's in good spirits. She's relieved to finally be heading home. And the fact remains that she's lost months of her life, experienced a needless trauma, and she deserves space, privacy, and time with her loved ones to recover and heal from her time being wrongfully detained. Brittney is an incomparable athlete, a two-time Olympic gold medalist for Team USA. She endured mistreatment and a show trial in Russia with characteristic grit and incredible dignity. She represents the best about America. It is across the board, everything about her. She wrote to me back in July. She didn't ask for special treatment, even though we've been working on a release from the day one. She requested a simple quote, "Please don't forget about me and the other American detainees." Please do all you can to bring us home. We never forgot about Brittney. We've not forgotten about Paul Whelan, who's been unjustly detained in Russia for years. This was not a choice of which American to bring home. We brought home Trevor Reed when we had a chance early this year. Sadly, for totally illegitimate reasons, Russia is treating Paul's case differently than Brittney's. And while we have not yet succeeded in securing Paul's release, we are not giving up. We will never give up. We remain in close touch with Paul's family, the Whelan family, and my thoughts and prayers are with them today. They have to have such mixed emotions today. And we'll keep negotiating in good faith for Paul's release. I guarantee that. I say that to the family. I guarantee you. And I urge Russia to do the same to ensure that Paul's health and humane treatment maintained until we are able to bring him home. I don't want any American to sit wrongfully detained and one extra day if we can bring that person home. My administration has now brought home dozens of Americans who were wrongfully detained or held hostage abroad, many of whom had been held since before I took office. And today we also remember the other Americans that are being held hostage and wrongfully detained in Russia or anywhere else in the world. Reuniting these Americans with their loved ones remains a priority for my administration, every person in my administration involved in this. We're going to continue to work to bring home every American who continues to endure such an injustice. We also want to prevent any more American families from suffering this pain and separation. And I strongly urge all Americans to take precautions, including reviewing the State Department's travel advisories before they travel overseas, which now includes warnings about the risk of being wrongfully detained by a foreign government. Make no mistake about it, this work is not easy. Negotiations are always difficult. There are never any guarantees, but it's my job as President of the United States to make the hard calls and protect American citizens everywhere in the world, anywhere in the world. And I'm proud that today we have made one more family whole again. So welcome home, Brittney. And now I'd like to invite Sherelle to say a few words to you all. Of course, she's not excited at all about this. Sherelle, it's all yours, kiddo. Congratulations again.
Thank you. So over the last 9 months, you all have been so privy to one of the darkest moments of my life. And so today I'm just standing here overwhelmed with emotions, but the most important emotion that I have right now is just sincere gratitude for President Biden and his entire administration. He just mentioned this work is not easy, and it has not been. There's been so many hands involved, and so I'd like to take a moment to just specifically mention a few. Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Josh Geltzer from the National Security Council, Roger Cartson and Fletcher, Schoen from the Hostage Envoy's Office. A special thank you to Governor Richardson and Mickey, the Mercury Players, the WNB, PA for your advocacy. And also, you guys may not know this, but my family has been tremendously supported by the Wasserman Agency. BG's agent, Lindsay Colas, has just been amazing for me and my family throughout this process. So today my family is whole, but as you all are aware, there's so many other families who are not whole. And so BG's not here to say this, but I will gladly speak on her behalf and say that BG and I will remain committed to the work of getting every American home, including Paul, whose family is in our hearts today. As we celebrate BG being home, we do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones. So thank you everybody for your support. And today it's just a happy day for me and my family. So I'm gonna smile right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.